In the northern reaches of Montana Territory, where the Rocky Mountains carved their jagged silhouettes against an endless sky, there existed places the law could not reach. Places where a man's word was his bond and his rifle was his courthouse. Places where the old ways still held, where justice was measured not in gavels and writs, but in courage and consequence. This was where Emma Brooks came to Dior to live. She had not yet decided which. The wagon groaned beneath her weight as it climbed the narrow mountain road. June's sunlight beat down merciless and bright, turning the pine-scented air thick as honey. Emma's hands, calloused and scarred, gripped the reins with a determination that belied the trembling in her fingers. The horse, old and patient, picked its way through loose stones and rutted earth with the careful steps of an animal that knew one misstep meant a 1,000-foot fall. She was 32 years old. She weighed 285 pounds. She had $23 in a cloth bag tucked against her ribs, a shotgun stolen from the man she'd fled, and papers that swore her name was Sarah Miller. All lies except the gun and the money. 3 days ago, she had been Emma Brooks' property, a Victor Ashford prisoner in a Denver mansion that smelled of cigars and decay. 3 days ago, she had taken a cast-iron skillet to the head of a household guard, stolen what she could carry, and vanished into the pre-dawn darkness like smoke. The memory played behind her eyes as the wagon lurched over a particularly vicious rut. Victor's voice, smooth and poisonous. "You're too fat for anyone else to want. Too ugly to show in public. You should be grateful I keep you. You should thank me for every meal, every roof, every moment I tolerate your presence." She had believed him. For 3 years, she had believed every word. Until the night he'd used his riding crop on her back, and she'd realized with sudden crystalline clarity that death was preferable to one more day in his house. The mountain road narrowed further. To her left, a sheer cliff face. To her right, a drop into nothing. Emma's pulse hammered in her throat, but she did not slow. Behind her lay Denver and Victor's reaching influence. Ahead lay the town of Whitefish, 25 miles beyond this ridge, and somewhere in between, if the store clerk's directions held true, a ranch owned by a man named Silas Thornton. A man, the clerk had said, with a curious mix of respect and fear, who did not tolerate fools, liars, or men who raised hands to women. Emma hoped to God he tolerated women who ran. The sun had begun its western descent when she finally crested the ridge. Below, nestled in a valley where 3 streams converged, sat the Thornton Ranch. It was not grand, no painted fences or manicured gardens, no fountain or gazebo. Just honest structures built from mountain timber. A cabin with smoke rising from its stone chimney, a large barn that had seen better years, corrals where cattle grazed in the afternoon heat, and smaller outbuildings scattered like dice across the property. It looked real, solid, permanent. Emma urged the horse forward, and with each downward step, her fear grew sharper. What if the clerk had lied? What if Thornton turned her away? What if Victor's men were already here waiting? Stop. She forced the spiral of panic down. One thing at a time. Ask or work. Offer skills. Do not beg. Do not cry. Show nothing but competence. The wagon rolled into the ranch yard and Emma pulled the horse to a stop. Dust settled around them in the sudden stillness. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the cabin door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. He was tall. That was Emma's first thought. Taller than any man she'd ever seen, 6.5 feet at least, with shoulders broad as an oak's trunk. Perhaps 45 years, maybe closer to 50, with hair dark, streaked with gray, pulled back from a face carved all in angles and hard lines. A scar ran from his left temple down across his cheekbone, the kind of wound that should have killed him, but had only left its mark. His eyes pale blue and cold, as winter sky fixed on her, with the intensity of a man who had learned to assess threats in the space of a heartbeat. He held a Winchester rifle loose in one hand, not pointed at her, not yet, but ready. Emma's mouth went dry. This was Silas Thornton. It could be no one else. He studied her for what felt like an hour, but was likely only seconds. His gaze moved from her face to the decrepit wagon to the shotgun visible on the seat beside her. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, the sound of stones grinding. "Husband or father?" Emma blinked. "What? The man you're running from, husband or father or creditor?" The directness of it stole her breath. No pretense, no social niceties, just the bare truth demanded plain. "Not husband," she managed, "but he thought I belonged to him. He armed He has money. Money buys guns. Silas nodded once, a sharp jerk of his chin that might have been approval. How many enough to matter? His eyes narrowed, assessing, calculating. Emma felt weighed and measured in that gaze. Found wanting or found acceptable, she could not tell. You can cook. The shift in topic jarred her. Yes. Clean men keep house. Yes. You afraid of work? No. Afraid of men? Emma hesitated. Honesty or survival, she chose truth. Some men, the wrong kind. What kind am I? She looked at him properly then. Saw the rifle held easy, not threatening. Saw the way he stood between her and the cabin door, protective of what was his, but not aggressive. Saw the scar and the gray hair and the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of pain endured and survived. The kind that's seen war, she said quietly, and didn't like it. Something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise. Recognition, perhaps. $12 a month, room in back of the house, 3 meals a day for me, and 3 hands. You steal, you're gone. You cause trouble, you're gone. This man comes looking for you, you tell me first thing. We clear. Emma's chest tightened. This was it. Yes or no. Safety or the road. Clear. Good. Stable your horse. Bring your things inside. Supper's in 2 hours. Men will be hungry. He turned and walked back into the cabin without another word, the screen door banging shut behind him. Emma sat frozen on the wagon seat, the reins still gripped, white-knuckle tight in her hands. It had taken 30 seconds, maybe less. No questions about her past, her weight, her worthiness. Just the stark terms of employment, offered and accepted. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from 3 days of travel, and immediately stumbled. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, exhaustion and relief turning her bones to water. She caught herself against the wagon's side, breathing hard, willing her body to obey. The barn door opened and a man emerged, younger than Silas, perhaps 40, with a weathered face and kind eyes. He wore work clothes dusty from the day's labor and moved with the easy confidence of someone who knew his place and his purpose. Tom Hendricks, he said, offering his hand. Foreman, you the new cook. Emma shook his hand, surprised by the lack of judgment in his expression. Emma Brooks. Welcome, Miss Brooks. Here, let me help with that horse. You look about ready to fall over. She wanted to protest that she could manage, but Tom was already unhitching the tired animal with practiced efficiency. Within minutes, the horse was led away to the barn, fed and watered, and settled for the night. Emma retrieved her single trunk and carpet bag from the wagon bed, the full weight of her possessions, and stood uncertain in the ranch yard. The cabin door opened again. This time 2 more men appeared. The first was older, 50 or more, with a face like worn leather and sharp eyes that took in everything. The second was barely more than a boy, 20 at most, tall and gangly, with the awkwardness of youth not yet grown into its frame. Jack Morrison, said the older man, tipping his hat. His voice carried the gravel of too many years and too much whiskey. That's Danny Cooper. Boy's still learning which end of a cow to milk. I know which end, Danny protested, his face flushing. Then to Emma, ma'am, pleased to meet you. Gentlemen, Emma managed. Jack's gaze flicked to her trunk, to her dusty dress, to the fading bruise on her wrist that she'd forgotten to cover. His expression hardened for just a moment, a brief flash of something that might have been anger or might have been understanding. Then it smoothed and he simply nodded. Rooms through the kitchen, last door on the right. Hasn't been used in a spell. You'll want to air it out. Thank you. She carried her things inside past Silas, who stood at the stove attempting to make coffee, past the rough-hewn table and mismatched chairs, past the signs of a house that had once been cared for and had slowly forgotten how. The room Jack had indicated was small, barely large enough for the narrow bed and single chair it contained. Dust coated every surface. The window was grimy, the floor unswept, the air stale and close. It was the most beautiful room Emma had ever seen. She set down her trunk and closed the door behind her. For the first time in 3 years, she stood in a space that was hers. A space with a door that locked from the inside. A space where no one would enter without permission. Emma Brooks, who had survived 3 years of Victor Ashford's particular brand of hell, who had crossed half of Montana territory with nothing but determination and stolen money, who had stared down a scarred mountain man without flinching, sat on the edge of that narrow bed and cried. Not from despair, from relief, from the sudden, overwhelming knowledge that she had made it. She was here. She was for this moment at least safe. The tears lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Then she wiped her face, stood up, and got to work. The room would not clean itself, and supper was in less than 2 hours. The kitchen, when she emerged to investigate, was a disaster. Not filthy, but neglected. Pots hung on their hooks, but grease had built up on the handles. The stove worked, but ash had been allowed to accumulate. The pantry held supplies, but they were disorganized flour mixed in with coffee, mixed in with dried beans in no discernible pattern. Emma tied on the apron she found hanging behind the door. It was too small, stretched tight across her middle, but it would do. She lit the stove, set water to boil, and began the work of transforming raw ingredients into something edible. Cooking was where Emma had always found her value. Her mother had taught her back before the fever took both parents and left Emma orphaned at 16. A series of boarding houses and restaurants had refined her skills. Victor Ashford had hired her to cook for his household staff, then gradually moved her into the main house, then gradually moved her into his bed, then gradually taken away every freedom until cooking was the only thing she had left that was still hers. But it was hers. This skill, this knowledge, this ability to take flour and meat and heat and produce something that made people pause and savor. "Lord Almighty," Jack finally said. He picked up his spoon and tasted the stew, his eyes closed. "Miss Brooks, if you cook like this every day, you can stay as long as you like." "Eat," Silas said. Just the one word, but it carried weight. They ate. In silence at first, the kind of focused quiet that came from men who had been genuinely hungry. Then slowly they began to relax. Jack told a story about an ornery cow that had kicked Danny into a water trough. Tom mentioned they'd need to ride out tomorrow to check the north fence line. Danny asked if anyone wanted to play cards after dinner. Normal conversation, the kind Emma had not heard in 3 years. In Victor's house, dinner had been a performance. Sit straight, you use the correct fork. Speak when spoken to, and never ever laugh too loud. Here, men spoke as they pleased, laughed when they wanted, reached across the table for seconds without ceremony. It was rough and unpolished and utterly, completely real. Emma stood by the stove, not sitting, not eating, waiting. Servants ate after not with. That was the rule she knew. "Sit down," Silas said without looking at her. His voice was not harsh, but it expected obedience. "I can eat later." "You cooked it. You eat it. Don't need you fainting from hunger and burning down my kitchen." Tom pushed the basket of biscuits toward the empty chair at the far end of the table. "Come on, Miss Brooks. Food this good shouldn't be enjoyed alone." Slowly Emma sat. She took a biscuit, broke it into small pieces, ate with the careful precision of someone who had learned not to draw attention. But she ate, with them, at their table, as if she belonged. When the meal finished, the men pushed back from the table with satisfied groans. Jack declared it the finest food he'd eaten in 6 months. Tom asked if she could make pie. Danny just grinned and said thank you 3 times. Silas stood, picked up his plate, and brought it to the wash basin. The others followed suit. Emma blinked, startled. In Victor's house, servants cleaned. Always. "You cooked," Tom said, seeing her confusion. "We clean up after ourselves, boss's rule." "Fair labor for fair pay," Jack added. "You work, we work. Simple as that." They cleared the table, washed their own dishes, and filed out to the bunkhouse beyond the barn. Emma stood in the kitchen that was suddenly quiet, the light fading to gold through the windows, and wondered if this place was real or if exhaustion had finally driven her mad. Silas remained. He poured 2 cups of coffee, black and strong, and handed one to her without asking if she wanted it. "You'll rise at 4, he said. "Breakfast at 5. Men work until noon, come back for dinner. Work again until dark supper at 7. Sundays you get afternoon free after midday meal. Wash water is from the pump out back. Privy is beyond the garden. You need supplies from town, make a list, Tom goes in Fridays." Emma nodded, absorbing the routine. "The room got a lock on the door?" Silas asked. "Yes." "Good, you use it. Every night. You hear anything strange, anyone you don't know, you bolt that door and you shout, 'I sleep light, I'll hear.'" "Understood." "Yes." "One more thing." He turned to face her fully, his pale eyes serious. "I don't know your full story, and I don't need to. But the man you're running from, he's going to come looking eventually. Men with money and pride always do. When he comes, you tell me immediately. Don't try to handle it yourself. Don't try to run again. You tell me and you let me deal with it. That's not negotiable." Emma's throat tightened. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. Don't owe me anything." "Because it's right," Silas said simply, "and because I've seen what men like that do to women. Saw it in the war. Saw it after. I didn't stop it then because I was following orders. I'm not following anybody's orders now. So when he comes, you let me handle it. We clear." "Clear." He nodded and left his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Emma stood alone in the kitchen with a cup of coffee she didn't remember drinking, with the echo of words that felt like a promise, and with the first fragile thread of hope she'd felt in longer than she could recall. The first week passed in a blur of work. Emma rose at 4 as instructed, lit the stove in the darkness, and had breakfast ready when the men stumbled in, still rubbing sleep from their eyes. She cooked. She cleaned. She scrubbed 4 years of bachelor neglect from every corner of the cabin until the windows gleamed and the floors no longer stuck to her shoes. She found her rhythm, found where things belonged, found the way this household wanted to run, and let herself flow into that pattern. The men treated her with careful courtesy. They did not touch, did not leer, did not make the crude jokes she'd grown accustomed to in other kitchens. Tom taught her where the root cellar was and how to check the supplies. Jack showed her which chickens were laying and which were just eating feed. Danny brought her wildflowers one morning, stammered an awkward explanation about how his mother always said women liked flowers, and fled before she could respond properly. Silas watched from a distance, not hovering, not micromanaging, just present. She'd look up from kneading bread and find him in the doorway, coffee cup in hand, observing. Not her body, not her movements, just watching with those pale, measuring eyes as if trying to solve a puzzle he had not expected to find. On the 5th day, Tom found Emma in the garden behind the cabin. The plot had been abandoned, weeds choking out anything useful, but the bones of it were good. Rich soil, southern exposure, close to the pump for water. Emma was on her hands and knees, pulling up the worst of the growth, her sleeves rolled to her elbows against the June heat. "Miss Brooks," Tom said carefully, "Boss wants to see you out by the barn." Emma's hands stilled in the dirt. The bruises on her forearms, faded now to yellow-green, but still visible, seemed to pulse. She'd been careful, kept her sleeves down, worked in long gloves when possible. But the heat made such caution difficult, and she had thought herself alone. "Did he say why?" Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "No, ma'am. Just said to send you out when I found you." Emma stood, brushed dirt from her skirt, and pulled her sleeves down with deliberate care. Whatever was coming, she would face it standing. Silas waited by the barn, one boot propped against the fence rail, his face in shadow beneath his hat brim. When he heard her approach, he straightened and turned. His expression was unreadable. "Roll up your sleeves," he said without preamble. Emma's stomach dropped. "Mr. Thornton, I don't think that's necessary." "Roll them up, both of them. Please, I can explain." Emma. The use of her first name stopped her. He had called her Miss Brooks until now, maintaining formal distance. The shift meant something. "I need to see, not to judge, to know what we're dealing with when he comes." He already knew someone was coming, had known from the first moment she arrived. Emma's hands shook as she pushed up first the left sleeve, then the right. The bruises formed a map of violence. Fingerprints on her left forearm where Victor had gripped too hard. A darker mark on her right wrist where he'd twisted until she dropped the plate she'd been holding. The small circular burn on her inner elbow from his cigarette, applied with surgical precision where it would not show in sleeves. Silas's jaw worked, his hands curled into fists at his sides, but his voice when he spoke remained level. "How long? 3 years. How often? Weekly, sometimes more. Weapons?" Emma shook her head. "Hands, cigarettes, once a riding crop. But mostly hands. He ever tried to kill you? Not intentionally, but 1 more year and I think—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Silas looked away toward the mountains where the afternoon sun painted the peaks in shades of gold. He was silent for a long moment. Then he pulled off his hat and ran one hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration or perhaps memory. "My wife Rebecca died 4 years ago," he said quietly. "Pneumonia. I rode 30 miles in a blizzard to fetch the doctor. Got back 2 hours too late." He replaced his hat, looked at Emma directly. "I tell you this so you understand. I know what it's like to lose someone because you couldn't protect them. because you weren't strong enough or fast enough or smart enough. I won't make that mistake twice. Mr. Thornton, you don't owe me protection. No, but you're on my land now. That makes you my responsibility. And I take my responsibilities serious. He paused. What's his name? Emma hesitated. Speaking it aloud felt like conjuring a demon. But Silas waited patient and immovable, and she realized he would wait all day if necessary. Victor Ashford. He owns the Ashford Freight Company in Denver, and half the judges and marshals between here and Kansas City. Silas absorbed this without visible reaction. Rich man. Very. Rich men think money buys everything. They're usually right. He met her eyes. But not here. Here money doesn't mean much. What matters is, can you shoot straight? Can you work hard? Can you keep your word? And if this Victor Ashford comes to my ranch thinking his money gives him rights to something that isn't his, he's going to learn a hard lesson about mountain justice. He'll bring men, hired guns. Then we'll be ready for them. Tom was cavalry scout. Jack trapped for 10 years knows every way a man can be killed. Danny's young, but he learns fast. And me? Silas's smile was cold. I've killed before. For my country, for my survival, for what's right. I won't hesitate to do it again. Emma wanted to tell him this was madness. That Victor had resources beyond imagining, that no one stood against him, and one that helping her would only bring destruction. But the words died in her throat because she saw in Silas Thornton's scarred face and winter sky eyes something she had not seen in so long she'd forgotten what it looked like. Absolute conviction. The unshakable certainty that he was right and would not be moved. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me yet. Storm's coming, and when it hits, you're going to need to be stronger than you've ever been. Can you shoot? Some. My father taught me before he died. Tom will work with you, starting tomorrow 1 hour after breakfast rifle practice. You need to be able to hit a man at 200 yards. Can you do that? I can learn. Good. Now get back to your garden. But Emma, one more thing. She turned back. You did the right thing. Running, surviving, coming here. Whatever voice in your head tells you different, whatever he made you believe about yourself, it's a lie. You understand? Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. That evening after supper was cleared and the men had retired to the bunkhouse, Emma sat on the narrow porch that ran along the front of the cabin. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Stars emerged overhead, more than she'd ever seen in Denver, a sprawling riot of light that made her feel both impossibly small and strangely comforted. Silas emerged from the cabin, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered one to her and settled into the chair beside hers without asking permission. They sat in companionable silence, watching the darkness deepen. Rebecca used to sit here, Silas said eventually, every evening, summer and winter. She'd watch the stars and tell me what she was grateful for that day. 3 things, no more, no less. He sipped his coffee. I thought it was silly at the time. Seemed like tempting fate to count your blessings, when life could take them away in a heartbeat. What changed your mind? She died, and I realized all those evenings I'd half listened while thinking about fence repairs or cattle prices. I'd wasted something precious. Time, attention, the sound of her voice. Emma turned the coffee cup in her hands, feeling its warmth. What would she say now if she could see all this? She'd say I was a damn fool for fighting a rich man's war over a woman I barely know. He smiled slightly. Then she'd roll up her sleeves and start loading rifles. Rebecca had strong opinions about bullies. I'm sorry you lost her. Me too, but she taught me something before she went. Taught me that doing right matters more than doing safe. That standing up for someone who can't stand for themselves is how you measure a man's worth. He looked at Emma. She would have liked you. She didn't know me. Didn't need to. She could read people. Would have seen what I see. Someone strong pretending to be weak so the world wouldn't crush her. Emma's chest tightened. I'm not strong. I ran. Running took more courage than staying. Leaving everything you knew, crossing territory alone with nothing but hope and a stolen shotgun, that's not weakness. That's survival. That's strength. Silas finished his coffee and stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we start preparing for war. The next 3 weeks passed in strange duality. Days were routine, almost peaceful. Emma cooked and cleaned and tended her garden, watching with satisfaction as the turned earth began to produce tiny green shoots. Tom taught her to shoot patiently, correcting her stance and breathing until she could reliably hit targets at 100 yards, then 200. Jack showed her the mountain trails, the places where someone could hide or escape if needed. Danny taught her to saddle a horse fast, his young hands quick and sure. But underneath the routine, tension grew. Silas rode to the neighboring ranches with news of potential trouble. Henderson to the west, Pratt to the north, Kelly to the east. All agreed without hesitation to watch for strangers, to send word if anyone came asking questions, to stand ready if needed. Mountain people took care of their own. Emma was one of them now. In the evenings after supper, there was often someone at the table discussing strategy. How many men might Victor bring? What routes they could take? Where to place lookouts? How long they could hold against a siege? The conversations were matter-of-fact, practical, no different than discussing crop rotation or cattle breeding. This was simply another problem to be solved. Emma participated less than she wished and more than she was comfortable with. She knew Victor's habits, his resources, his pride. She shared what she could, feeling like a traitor, even though the man she betrayed had betrayed her first and more thoroughly. On the 18th day, Danny came galloping into the ranch yard at mid-morning, his young face flushed with exertion. "Rider coming, says he's U.S. Marshal." The barn erupted with controlled chaos. Tom and Jack appeared from their work rifles already in hand. Silas stepped onto the porch, his Winchester held casual but ready. Emma moved to the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. A single rider crested the ridge 5 minutes later. He wore a badge that caught the sunlight, rode a good horse with easy confidence, and kept his hands visible as he approached. Perhaps 50, with gray, streaking his dark hair, and the bearing of a man who had enforced law in hard places. He stopped his horse 30 yards from the cabin, close enough to talk, far enough to avoid immediate threat. "Silas Thornton," his voice carried clear in the mountain air. "That's right. I'm Marshal Benjamin Porter out of Helena. I'm looking for a woman. Name's Emma Brooks, though she might be using the alias Sarah Miller, wanted for theft and assault." Emma's blood turned to ice. Victor had moved faster than she'd hoped. "What makes you think this woman's here, Marshal?" Silas's voice was level, giving nothing away. "Got reports she headed north from Denver. This ranch is one of the few places someone could hide out this far from town." Porter's gaze swept the visible areas, taking in Tom and Jack's ready stance, the defensible position of the cabin. "Mr. Ashford is a respected businessman. Says Miss Brooks stole $5,000 in cash and jewelry, then attacked him when he confronted her." "That's a serious charge." "It is, which is why I'd appreciate your cooperation in searching the premises." Tom and Jack had moved to flank Silas. 3 rifles, 3 men who knew how to use them. The message was clear without being explicit. "I don't have anyone by that name here, Marshal. Just my 3 hands and my cook." "Your cook got a name." "My sister-in-law, Rebecca's sister, visiting from back east." The lie came so smooth Emma almost believed it herself. Porter's eyes narrowed. "That's so funny thing. I did some checking after Mr. Ashford filed his complaint. Rebecca Thornton's family died in a cholera outbreak 5 years back. No siblings, no cousins, nobody." Silas didn't flinch. "You calling me a liar, Marshal? I'm saying your story doesn't add up. And I'm saying you've got no warrant, no evidence, and no right to search my property without cause." Silas's voice hardened. "You want to try anyway, you're welcome. But I guarantee you'll regret it." Porter's hand rested near his sidearm, not drawing but ready. The moment stretched taut as wire. "Mr. Ashford has connections, Thornton, judges, senators, men who can make your life very difficult. Maybe in Denver. Up here, his connections don't mean much." Silas took one step forward. "But here's what I'll tell you, Marshal, man to man. If there was a woman here who'd been beaten regular by some wealthy son of a bitch, who'd finally found the courage to run, who'd come to my door asking for nothing but honest work and a safe place to sleep, I'd give it to her. And I'd tell any marshal who came sniffing around that unless he had proof, real proof, not just the word of an abuser, he could take his warrant and ride back to wherever he came from." Porter absorbed this. His hand moved away from his gun. "You've got a daughter, Silas' sister, someone you care about. What's that matter? Because if you did, and some man was hurting her, making her afraid to leave, making her think she deserved what he did, and she finally got away, Would you want people to send her back? Or would you want them to give her a chance? Silas's expression didn't change. I'd want them to stand between her and the man who hurt her, no matter what it cost. Porter nodded slowly. That's what I thought you'd say. He gathered his reins. I'll be reporting back to Mr. Ashford that I found no evidence of Miss Brooks at this location. But he's not going to take that answer kindly. He'll come himself or send men. And when he does, you'll be on your own. I can't help you then. Never asked you to. No, you didn't? Porter turned his horse. For what it's worth, Silas, I hope she was worth it. Whatever's coming. He rode away, dust rising in his wake. Silas didn't lower his rifle until Porter disappeared over the ridge. Then he turned and his gaze found Emma in the doorway. He'll tell Ashford you're here. We've got maybe a week before he arrives with enough men to make this ugly. Starting now, we prepare in earnest. That afternoon, Silas rode to Whitefish while Tom organized defenses. Extra ammunition was pulled from storage and distributed. Weapons were cleaned and recleaned. Watch rotations were established so someone was always alert. The barn's hayloft became a sniper position. The cabin's windows were reinforced with heavy shutters that could be barred from inside. Emma helped where she could, feeling the weight of guilt pressed down on her shoulders. These men were preparing for battle because of her. Good men who owed her nothing were about to risk everything because she'd been too weak to handle Victor alone. Jack found her in the kitchen that evening, staring at nothing. The old trapper pulled out a chair and sat without invitation. You're thinking this is your fault, he said bluntly. Emma didn't deny it. It's not. This is his fault. The man who thought owning things meant owning people. The man who used his fists instead of his words. That's where the fault lies. Jack's weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup. You want to know something? I've got a sister back in Missouri. Had a husband who treated her like you were treated. She stayed because she didn't know there was another choice. Died before she was 30, fell down the stairs. He pushed her down. Or so the sheriff ruled it. He looked at Emma with eyes that had seen too much. You ran. You chose life. Don't you dare feel guilty for that. And don't you dare feel guilty that decent men want to stand between you and evil. That's what decent men are supposed to do. But you could die. Could die tomorrow from a snake bite or a bad fall. Could die next winter from pneumonia. Could die because I drank too much and choked on my own spit. Jack shrugged. Dying's easy. It's living with yourself when you turn away from someone who needs help that's hard. I'd rather die standing than live kneeling. Most men up here feel the same. Emma's eyes burned. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just promise me something. When this is over, when Ashford's dealt with, you'll live. Really live. Not just survive, but thrive. Have joy. Maybe even fall in love if you're fool enough. His smile was crooked. Boss looks at you like you're something precious. Doesn't think anyone notices, but we all do. Give him a chance, maybe. Man's been dead inside since Rebecca went. You could bring him back. I'm not ready for that. Good. Means you're smart. But someday you might be. Keep it in mind. Silas returned from town as the sun set his saddlebags heavy. He distributed ammunition supplies, the practical necessities of conflict. Then he called them all together in the cabin's main room. Porter will have telegraphed Denver by now. Ashford knows Emma's here. He'll come probably with at least a dozen hired guns. Maybe more if he wants to make a point. Silas's gaze swept across his three hands and settled on Emma. We can't know when, but it'll be soon. Days, not weeks. What's the plan? Tom asked. We hold. Ranch is defensible if we're smart. We've got high ground, clear sight lines, and we know this land. They don't. Silas unfolded a hand-drawn map on the table. Danny, you'll take watch on the ridge. See them coming, you light the signal, fire, then ride hard for Henderson's place. They've agreed to come with their men if needed. Yes, sir. Tom, Jack, you'll take positions in the barn loft and by the well. Crossfire coverage of the yard. Don't shoot first, but if it starts, make every shot count. Understood. Silas looked at Emma. You'll be upstairs, back bedroom with the best view. Winchester full magazine. If anyone gets past us and tries to enter this cabin, you shoot them. No warning, no hesitation. Understood. Emma's mouth was dry. What if I can't? What if I freeze? Then you die, but I don't think you will. You've already shown you'll do what's necessary to survive. This is just more of the same." His voice gentled slightly. "I know you're scared. That's smart. Fear keeps you sharp. But don't let it paralyze you. When the moment comes, you'll know what to do." That night, Emma lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. The Winchester leaned in the corner, loaded and ready. Outside, Tom walked the first watch, his footsteps a quiet reassurance in the darkness. She thought about Victor, about the first time he'd hit her, the shock and disbelief, about the 100th time when shock had long since faded to numb acceptance, about the last time when something inside her had finally broken, or maybe finally healed enough to recognize breaking. She thought about Silas, about the way he'd offered protection without asking for anything in return, about his cold certainty that what he was doing was right, as if morality was as simple as breath, about his patience, his distance, his refusal to treat her as anything other than exactly what she was, a woman doing, a job earning her keep, deserving of basic human respect. And she thought about herself, about who she'd been before Victor and who she was becoming after, about whether she could actually pull the trigger if a man came through that door intent on dragging her back to Denver. The answer, she discovered with something like surprise, was yes. She could and she would. Emma Brooks had spent 3 years being a victim. That time was done. 3 days later, Danny came thundering into the ranch yard at dawn, his horse lathered and wild-eyed. Riders, 12 of them, maybe more, coming up the mountain road. The preparations that had seemed almost like theater suddenly became desperately real. Tom and Jack grabbed their rifles and took their positions. Danny, despite his fear, climbed to the ridge as ordered to light the signal fire. Silas checked his weapons with the calm of a man who had done this before and knew the price. Emma climbed the stairs to the back bedroom. She pushed open the shutters, positioned herself where she had a clear view of the yard, and laid the Winchester across the windowsill. Her hands shook. She forced them still. Below, Silas stood alone on the porch, one man against 12. It was insanity. It was suicide. It was honor. The riders appeared over the ridge like something from a nightmare. Victor Ashford led them, dressed absurdly in an expensive suit, his dark hair slicked back, his expression one of absolute confidence. Behind him rode 8 rough men in city clothes, hired guns with hard faces and easy violence. And beside him, looking distinctly uncomfortable, rode Marshal Benjamin Porter. They stopped 40 yards from the cabin. Victor dismounted with theatrical precision, brushing dust from his jacket as if this were a social call rather than an invasion. His voice carried across the yard, smooth and poisonous. "Silas Thornton, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Silas did not move from the porch. "Don't recall borrowing anything from you, Ashford. Don't play games. Emma Brooks is here. She's a thief and a liar, and I've come to take her back to face justice. The only thing you'll be taking from here is regret." Victor's smile was sharp. Bold words from one man facing 12. "Marshal Porter, show him the warrant." Porter dismounted slowly, reluctance in every movement. He approached the porch with a rolled document extended at arm's length, like an offering to an unpredictable animal. Silas took it, read it quickly, his jaw tightening. "Says here Miss Brooks assaulted you. That true? She attacked me when I discovered her theft. I have a doctor's statement documenting my injuries." "I'm sure you do." Silas let the paper fall to the porch. "Here's what I think happened. I think you beat a woman for 3 years until she couldn't take it anymore. I think she ran, and you can't stomach the idea that your property had the spine to leave. I think you paid a doctor to write lies and a judge to sign this worthless paper, and now you've come here thinking your money gives you rights." Victor's mask cracked, showing the rage beneath. "She is mine. I fed her, housed her, tolerated her disgusting presence, and she repaid me with betrayal." From the upstairs window, Emma heard those words, heard the venom in them, the absolute conviction that she was a thing to be owned. And something inside her, something that had been bent and broken for so long, finally snapped back into place. She stood, moved to the door, descended the stairs with her heart hammering but her steps steady. She walked through the kitchen, pushed open the screen door, and stepped onto the porch beside Silas Thornton. Victor's face went white with rage and something else. Shock, perhaps, that his broken toy had found the courage to stand before him. "Hello, Victor," Emma said quietly. Her voice did not shake. The mountain wind shifted, carrying the scent of horses and gun oil, and the particular smell of men who had traveled far with violent purpose. Victor Ashford stared at Emma standing on Silas Thornton's porch, and for one crystalline moment the world held its breath. Then Victor laughed. Not the polite laughter of social occasions, but something raw and ugly that scraped against the morning air. "Emma," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Look at you. Your new employer has been feeding you well, I see. You've gotten even larger." Emma felt the old shame try to rise, the automatic response to his mockery that had been trained into her over 3 years of methodical cruelty. But beside her, Silas shifted his weight slightly, not moving toward her, not touching her, just present, solid, unmovable, and the shame found no purchase. "I eat because I choose to," Emma said, her voice carrying across the yard. "I work because I choose to. I stand here because I choose to. Everything I do now is my choice, Victor. Not yours, never yours again." Victor's expression twisted. The mask of civilized charm he wore for the world cracked like cheap porcelain, revealing the rotted thing beneath. "You ungrateful whore, I took you from nothing, gave you a home, food, clothing. And this is how you repay me, by stealing my property and spreading lies. The only thing I took was myself, and I was never your property. You were always my property." Victor's shout echoed off the mountains. His hired guns shifted uncomfortably, hands drifting toward their weapons. "Every meal you ate, every dress you wore, every moment under my roof, I owned all of it. I owned you." Silas spoke then, his voice cutting through Victor's tirade like a blade through silk. "Ashford, Miss Brooks has made her position clear. She doesn't want to go with you. She's not going to go with you. And I'm not going to let you take her. So you have two choices. You can ride back down that mountain right now, or you can try to take what doesn't belong to you and discover what mountain justice looks like." Victor turned his attention to Silas, assessing him the way a buyer might assess livestock. "Do you know who I am? What I'm worth? What I can do to you? Don't particularly care. I could buy this ranch 10 times over. I could have you arrested for harboring a fugitive. I could destroy everything you've built with a single telegram. Maybe in Denver. Up here, things work different." Marshal Porter stepped forward, his weathered face troubled. "Mr. Thornton, I don't want violence, but I have a legal warrant for Miss Brooks's arrest. I have a duty to execute it." "That warrant based on his word," Silas nodded toward Victor. "No other witnesses, no evidence beyond what he claims. The law says I have to bring her in for questioning. The law also says a man's innocent until proven guilty. I've known Emma Brooks for near a month now. She's worked hard, caused no trouble, shown nothing but honest character. Meanwhile, this man rides onto my land with 8 hired guns and talks about owning people. Which one of them seems more likely to be telling the truth, a marshal?" Porter's jaw worked. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, taking in the way she stood despite her fear. The fading bruises still visible on her wrists, the way she flinched slightly when Victor raised his voice. "Mr. Ashford," Porter said slowly, "did you strike Miss Brooks during her time in your employment?" "I disciplined her when necessary. She was hysterical, irrational. Sometimes force was required to maintain order in my household." "You hit her." "I corrected her." "How often?" Victor's eyes narrowed. "That's not relevant to the theft charges." "It's relevant to me." Porter turned back to Silas. "Mr. Thornton, I came here to do my job. But my job is to uphold justice, not help wealthy men abuse their power." He raised his voice so all the riders could hear. "I'm not executing this warrant. In my professional opinion, it's based on fraudulent claims made by an abuser trying to recover a victim who had the courage to escape." Victor's face went purple. "You can't refuse. I paid good money for that warrant. You just admitted to bribery in front of a U.S. Marshal. You might want to stop talking, Mr. Ashford. I'll have your badge. I'll have you brought up on charges. I'll destroy you." Porter smiled without humor. "You can try, but I've got 20 years of honest service, and you've got a history that I'm betting looks a lot darker once people start looking close. Now I'm riding back to Helena. You're welcome to file a complaint, but if I were you, I'd consider cutting my losses." He mounted his horse and turned it toward the mountain road. Before he rode away, he looked back at Silas. "You've got maybe 3 days before he comes back with men who don't care about warrants or laws. Be ready." The marshal disappeared over the ridge. Victor watched him go, his face contorted with rage. Then he turned back to Silas, and when he spoke, all pretense of civility was gone. You think this is over? You think one corrupt marshal changes anything? He gestured to his hired guns. I have men, I have money, I have resources you can't imagine. I will take what belongs to me, and when I'm done, I'll salt the earth of this miserable patch of dirt so nothing ever grows here again. Get off my land, Silas said quietly. Now. Or what you'll shoot me in front of witnesses, you'll hang for murder. Maybe, but you'll still be dead. Silas's rifle came up, not pointed at Victor, but no longer pointing at the ground. Your men might get me eventually, might even get my hands, but I guarantee you won't live to see it. So the question you need to ask yourself is simple. Is she worth dying for? Victor stared at the rifle, at Silas's cold certainty, at the way Tom and Jack had positioned themselves with clear firing lines, at the way Emma stood on that porch, no longer cowering, no longer his. This isn't finished, Victor said, his voice low and venomous. I'll be back, with more men, and when I come, I won't bother with talk. He mounted his horse with sharp, violent movements. His hired guns followed clearly, relieved to be leaving. They rode back down the mountain road, dust rising in their wake, 8 men who had come for violence and left with nothing but threats. Silas did not lower his rifle until they disappeared from sight. Only then did he exhale, the tension bleeding from his shoulders. That was either very brave or very stupid, Tom said, emerging from the barn. Probably both, Silas admitted. He looked at Emma. You all right? Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. She had stood before Victor Ashford and said no. Said it clear in public where it could not be twisted or denied. The weight of that, the sheer enormity of it, was only now beginning to sink in. He'll come back, she managed. You know he will? I'm counting on it. Silas set his rifle aside. This time we'll be ready. This time there'll be witnesses and consequences. And this time he won't walk away. The ranch transformed over the next 48 hours. What had been preparation became fortification. Silas and Tom rode to the neighboring ranches, returning with promises of support. Henderson, Pratt, Kelly all agreed to send men if needed. The mountain community code was simple. When trouble came, you stood together or you fell alone. Additional ammunition arrived from Whitefish. Jack set up warning systems, bells strung on wire at key approaches that would alert them to movement. Danny, despite his youth, took to the work with grim determination. He practiced loading and firing until his hands moved with unconscious speed, until he could hit targets at distance without conscious thought. And Emma trained, not just with rifles now, but with the practical skills of siege. How to treat gunshot wounds, how to reload under pressure, how to move through the cabin without exposing herself to windows, how to recognize the sound of different weapons so she'd know what she was facing. She learned with the desperate focus of someone who knew her, survival might depend on these skills. Tom was a patient teacher, his cavalry training evident in every lesson. He never coddled her, never suggested she might be spared from violence. He treated her as he would any soldier, with the respect of shared danger. On the second night, Emma found Silas on the porch again, staring out at darkness. She brought him coffee without asking, settled into the chair beside his. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the night sounds of the mountain. When Victor comes back, Emma said quietly, I want to fight, not hide upstairs while you risk everything. Silas turned to her. You will be fighting from the best defensive position. That's not hiding, that's strategy. It feels like hiding. Feels and is are different things. He sipped his coffee. You've already proven you're brave, standing up to him at the first confrontation that took more courage than most people have. Now you need to be smart, not just brave. Emma was quiet for a moment. I'm afraid he'll win, that all this preparation won't matter. He might, but we'll make him pay for every inch, and if we go down fighting for something that matters. Silas looked at her directly. You matter, Emma. This fight matters. Don't forget that. She nodded, feeling the weight of his conviction. I won't. Good. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we drill again. By the time he comes back, you'll be ready. They came on the third night. Danny was on watch, positioned on the ridge where he could see the mountain road by moonlight. He heard them before he saw them, the careful, muffled sound of many horses moving slowly. He lit the signal, fire as instructed, then rode hard for Henderson's ranch, his young legs tight against the horse's flanks. At the cabin, the bells rang. Tom and Jack grabbed rifles and moved to their positions with practiced efficiency. Emma climbed to the upstairs bedroom, her heart hammering, but her hands steady. And Silas stepped onto the porch, alone in the moonlight, waiting. They did not come up the main road this time. Victor had learned that lesson. Instead, they approached from three sides, trying to surround the ranch before launching their attack. 8 men, professional killers with cold eyes and efficient movements. Not Victor himself. He had sent his dogs to do his dirty work. The first gunshot came without warning. A rifle crack that shattered the night silenced the bullet punching into the cabin's wall 3 feet from Silas's head. He dropped flat, rolled behind the porch railing, and returned fire in one smooth motion. Then chaos. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. The air filled with the crack of rifles, the deeper boom of shotguns, the whine of bullets passing too close. Tom fired from the barn loft, his cavalry training evident in his precise shooting. Jack worked his rifle from behind the well, each shot carefully aimed. Emma, from her upstairs window, forced herself to breathe and aim, and pull the trigger, forced herself not to think about the fact that she was shooting at human beings. The attackers had expected easy targets, confused victims to overwhelm with numbers and violence. They found instead prepared defenders who knew their ground and had no intention of yielding. The firefight lasted perhaps 15 minutes, but felt like hours. When it ended, one attacker lay dead in the yard, another 2 wounded and crawling for cover. The rest retreated into the darkness, dragging their casualties with them. Silas waited until he was certain they were gone before standing. His ears rang from the gunfire. His shoulder burned where a bullet had grazed him, drawing blood, but nothing serious. He checked on his people first, always his people first. Tom was uninjured, already reloading with mechanical precision. Jack had taken a bullet through his hat, but the old trapper just laughed and said he'd needed a new one anyway. And Emma descended the stairs with eyes too wide and hands shaking, but otherwise intact. "You hit anyone?" Silas asked her. "I don't know, maybe. I tried to aim like Tom taught me." "That's all you can do. Try your best and accept the results." He touched her shoulder briefly. "You did good." Dawn came gray and uncertain. The dead attacker was still in the yard. Silas and Tom dragged him to the barn, went through his pockets with methodical care. No identification, just money and ammunition in a sealed letter with instructions written in Victor Ashford's distinctive hand. Burn the ranch, kill the men, bring the woman back alive if possible, dead if necessary. Silas read the letter twice, then burned it. Evidence or not, some things were too dangerous to keep. The wounded attackers had been left behind by their companions, abandoned to their fate. Jack treated their injuries with rough competence, then tied them to posts in the barn. When they were conscious enough to answer questions, Silas questioned them without mercy. They talked. Men facing death usually did. They were hired from Denver, and Cheyenne promised $500 each to help Victor Ashford recover his stolen property. They knew about the abuse, had heard Victor's rants about the ungrateful woman who dared to leave him. Some of them had been uncomfortable with the job, but money was money, and they'd seen worse. "How many more is he bringing?" she was asked. "Another dozen, maybe more." He put out word across 3 territories. "Anyone who wants $500 and doesn't mind rough work." Went 3 days, maybe 4. He's gathering them at a camp 5 miles south. Silas absorbed this information, his expression unreadable. Then he untied the men, gave them their horses, and sent them down the mountain with a message. "Tell Victor Ashford that this is his last chance to walk away. Tell him that if he comes back, he's a dead man. Tell him that I've killed before, and I'll kill again, and his money won't stop a bullet." The wounded men rode away, grateful to be alive. Silas watched them go, knowing they'd deliver his message, and knowing it wouldn't matter. Men like Victor Ashford didn't back down. They escalated. That afternoon, riders appeared on the ridge. Not attackers this time, but neighbors. Henderson with 5 men, Pratt with 3, Kelly with 2. They'd seen Danny's signal, heard the gunfire, and come as promised. Henderson was a weathered rancher in his 60s, tough as jerky, and twice as mean when provoked. He surveyed the cabin, the bullet holes, the signs of battle, and nodded. "Looks like you had yourself a night." "Just the start," Silas said. "He's got more men coming. This was just him testing our defenses. Then we'll strengthen them. My boys are good shots. We'll rotate watches, make sure you've got fresh eyes at all times." I can't ask you to risk your lives for this. You didn't ask. We came because it's right. Henderson spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Besides, Ashford types need to learn that money doesn't buy everything. Sometimes it buys a bullet. The ranch became an armed camp. 20 men all told rotating through watches and meals and the strange camaraderie that came from shared danger. Emma cooked for them all vast quantities of simple food that fueled bodies preparing for war. She listened to their stories, their easy laughter, their casual acceptance of violence as part of life in hard country, and she wondered at the strangeness of it. These men, most of whom she barely knew, were willing to fight and potentially die for her. Not because she was special, not because she could offer them anything in return, simply because it was right and they had decided that right mattered more than safe. On the second day, Silas made his decision. He gathered Tom and Jack and Danny in the cabin, spread a hand-drawn map on the table. Victor's got a camp 5 miles south. 20 men, maybe more by now. They're planning their assault, probably for tomorrow night when they think we're tired. He tapped the map. I'm going to pay them a visit. Tonight. Alone. Boss, that's suicide, Tom protested. It's strategy. They outnumber us 2-1. Those aren't winning odds, even with good defenses. But if I can get into their camp, 'cause chaos take out a few of them, maybe I can even the numbers. Or get yourself killed. That's a risk, but it's better than waiting here for them to come at us again with fresh men and a solid plan. Silas looked at each of them in turn. I need you here. Defending the ranch, protecting Emma. This is something I have to do alone. Emma, listening from the doorway, felt her chest tighten. No, it's too dangerous. Silas turned to her. The most dangerous thing would be doing nothing. Letting them attack when they were ready on their terms. This way I take the initiative. You could die. Could die staying here too. At least this way I die doing something useful. She wanted to argue, wanted to forbid it, wanted to scream that he was being foolish and reckless and that she couldn't bear the thought of him not coming back. But she had no right to forbid anything. He was not hers to command. And more than that, she understood the logic of what he was proposing, even if she hated it. Then come back, she said quietly. Please come back. Planning on it. He left at midnight. No fanfare, no dramatic goodbye. Just slipped into the darkness like smoke, taking only a knife, a pistol, and one rifle. The others watched him go tense and worried but trusting. They had seen him in battle, had seen what he could do when necessary. If anyone could infiltrate an enemy camp and live to tell about it, it was Silas Thornton. Emma could not sleep. She sat in the upstairs window rifle across her lap, watching the darkness as if she could will him safe through sheer force of concentration. Hours passed. The moon tracked across the sky. And finally, as false dawn began to gray the eastern mountains, a figure emerged from the trees. Silas, walking steady, unhurried, very much alive. Emma was down the stairs and out the door before conscious thought. She stopped herself before running to him, maintained some shred of dignity, but just barely. You're back. Told you I would be. He was breathing hard, his face streaked with dirt and something that might have been blood, but wasn't his. Got into their camp. Took out 2 sentries, got close enough to Victor's tent to put my gun to his head. You could have killed him. Could have, didn't. Silas's smile was cold. Wanted him to know that I could have. That I got past all his hired guns into his tent, had him at my mercy and chose to let him live. That's going to eat at him worse than death would. What did you tell him? That next time I won't be so merciful. That his money can't protect him from me. That Emma Brooks is worth more than his entire worthless life. He met her eyes. Also left my knife stuck in his pillow about an inch from his head. Carved next time into the handle. Figure that'll send a message. Tom and Jack appeared drawn by the commotion. When Silas told them what he'd done, Jack laughed until tears ran down his weathered face. Boss, you've got stones the size of boulders. Walking into a camp of 20 men just to scare one. Had to be done. Couldn't let them think we were just going to sit here and take whatever they dished out. Silas accepted the coffee Emma pressed into his hands. But it's going to make Victor furious. He'll come sooner now, probably with everyone he's got. Tonight, maybe tomorrow. We need to be ready. They were ready. Every man armed and positioned. Extra ammunition distributed. Medical supplies laid out. Escape routes planned if the worst happened. The Thornton Ranch had become a fortress manned by 20 determined men who had decided that this particular hill was worth defending. Victor Ashford came at dusk, not sneaking this time, not trying for surprise. He came in full force, a show of overwhelming power meant to break their will before the first shot was fired. 28 men, some on horses, some on foot, spread out in a semicircle that encompassed the entire ranch. And leading them, Victor himself, no longer hiding behind his hired killers, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. They stopped just out of rifle range. Victor rode forward alone, stopping at the edge of what he clearly thought was safe distance. Silas Thornton, his voice carried across the intervening space. This is your last chance. Surrender them a Brooks, and I'll spare your men. Roughsee, and I'll burn everything you own to ashes. Silas stepped onto the porch. Around him, hidden from casual view, but present, 20 rifles found their targets. She's not yours to take. She was always mine. I made her. Without me, she was nothing. Without you, she was free. There's a difference. Victor's control snapped. He drew a pistol and fired the bullet, going wild, but the intent clear. Around him, his hired guns raised their weapons, and hell came to the Thornton Ranch. The cannon Victor had brought fired first a solid shot that punched into the barn's corner. Wood exploded in splinters, then rifles, dozens of them all firing at once. The air filled with smoke and thunder and the whine of bullets. Silas's defenders returned fire with disciplined precision. Tom from the barn loft picking targets with sniper care. Jack from the well, his old trapper skills evident in his shooting. The neighboring ranchers from positions around the property creating overlapping fields of fire. And Emma from the upstairs window, forcing herself to aim and fire and reload, forcing herself to be part of this defense. The battle was chaos and noise and terror. A bullet smashed through the window beside Emma's head, showering her with glass. Another punched into the wall close enough that she felt the wind of its passage. She kept firing, tears streaming down her face, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, that Silas would survive this madness. Below, Danny moved from position to position, carrying ammunition to men who needed it. He was exposed, vulnerable, but too young and brave to realize the danger. A hired gun spotted him, raised his rifle, fired. Danny went down. Emma saw it happen, saw the boy's shoulder jerk back, saw the blood spray, saw him fall into the dust. She screamed, but the sound was lost in gunfire. Tom was already moving, sprinting from the barn to Danny's side, dragging the wounded boy to cover, while bullets chewed the ground around them. The barn was burning now. Victor's men had gotten close enough, with torches set the dry wood ablaze. Flames licked through the structure, smoke billowing black and thick. The cattle stampeded, panicked, destroying fences as they ran. Jack tried to reach the barn to save what could be saved. A bullet caught him in the leg. He went down hard but kept firing, propped against the well, his face set in grim determination. This was no longer battle, it was slaughter. Victor had brought overwhelming force, and he was using it without mercy. The defenders were being pushed back, wounded, overwhelmed. Silas, seeing the tide turning, made a desperate decision. He charged from the cabin, rifle blazing, drawing fire toward himself and away from his wounded men. Bullets plucked at his clothes. One scored his ribs. Another shattered his rifle stock. But he kept moving, kept firing, kept buying time. And then from the ridge came the sound of a bugle. Cavalry charged, the notes crystal clear in the smoky air. But it was not soldiers who crested that ridge. It was more neighbors, more ranchers, men Silas had not even asked, but who had heard the gunfire and come anyway. 15 fresh fighters, rifles ready, charging down the slope toward Victor's exposed flank. The tide shifted. Victor's hired guns, caught between two forces, suddenly realized they were no longer overwhelming, but surrounded. Men began to break, to run, to abandon their employer in favor of their lives. Victor himself, seeing his force disintegrating, made a final desperate decision. He grabbed a rifle from a fallen man, aimed it toward the cabin, toward the window where Emma stood visible. If I can't have you, no one will. Time slowed. Emma saw the rifle come up, saw Victor's finger tighten on the trigger, knew with perfect clarity that she was about to die. Silas saw it too. Saw the rifle, saw Emma in the window, saw the murder in Victor's eyes. He was 300 yards away, wounded, his rifle damaged. The shot was impossible. He took it anyway. The bullet left his rifle with a crack that seemed to silence all other sound. It crossed 300 yards in less than a second, and it hit Victor Ashford's rifle dead center, tearing it from his hands, sending it spinning into the dust. Victor stared at his empty hands, shocked, not understanding what had happened. Then Silas worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. This bullet took Victor in the shoulder, spinning him around, dropping him to the ground. "Stay down!" Silas bellowed across the battlefield. "Next one goes through your skull." Victor stayed down. The firing stopped. In the sudden quiet, smoke drifted, and men groaned, and somewhere a horse screamed with injury. The battle was over. The defenders had won, but at terrible cost. Silas moved through the carnage with military efficiency. Wounded men were carried to the cabin. Dead were counted, identified, laid out with what respect could be managed. Prisoners were secured, disarmed, tied with their own belts and ropes. Emma climbed down from the window on legs that barely held her. She found Danny first, his young face gray with shock and pain, but alive. The bullet had gone through his shoulder, cleanly missing bone and major blood vessels. He would recover. Jack's leg wound was worse, but not fatal. Tom was already binding it with practiced hands, muttering curses about fool old men who thought they were still young enough to dodge bullets. And then Emma saw Silas and her heart stopped. He was covered in blood, so much blood that she was certain he was dying. She ran to him, grabbed his arm, tried to check his wounds. "I'm fine," he said, catching her hands. "None of this isn't mine. Scratches, that's all. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding." "Then I'm bleeding fine." He smiled, exhausted but genuine. "We won, Emma. We held. He's done." She looked past him to where Victor Ashford lay in the dirt, wounded and captured and finished. The man who had owned her, controlled her, broken her, was now the one helpless and trapped. What happens now? Now we let the law handle it. Real law this time, not his bought version. As if summoned by the words, riders appeared on the ridge. Not more attackers, but something stranger. A small group led by a man in a suit carrying not weapons but a briefcase. Behind him rode 10 men in federal uniforms, genuine U.S. Marshals with badges that meant something. The man in the suit dismounted, carefully surveying the battlefield with the clinical eye of someone who had seen violence before and found it distasteful but necessary. He was perhaps 45, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the bearing of someone accustomed to courtrooms rather than gunfights. "My name is Samuel Booth," he announced. "I'm an attorney from Helena. I represent the territory of Montana, and I have a warrant for the arrest of Victor Ashford." Victor, still on the ground, clutching his wounded shoulder, stared in disbelief. "Arrest on what charges?" "Fraud, extortion, attempted murder of federal officers, illegal warfare, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and about 15 other counts I'll detail once we get you to a proper courthouse." Booth pulled papers from his briefcase. "I've been investigating your business practices for 6 months, Mr. Ashford. 3 other women have come forward with stories remarkably similar to Miss Brooks. You should have quit while you were ahead. This is conspiracy. You can't prove anything." "Actually, I can. I have testimony from your former business partners whom you defrauded. I have statements from women you abused. I have financial records showing your various illegal schemes. And now," Booth gestured at the devastation around them, "I have witnesses to attempted murder and illegal assault on private property." He turned to Silas. "Mr. Thornton, you and your men will need to give testimony. The territorial judge will want to hear your account of what happened here." "We'll testify," Silas said. "Every word of it true." The federal marshals moved in, taking Victor into custody despite his protests and threats. His hired guns, those who had survived and not fled, were also arrested. The carefully constructed empire Victor Ashford had built on violence and corruption came crashing down in the dusty yard of a mountain ranch. As they loaded Victor onto a horse for transport to Helena, Emma stepped forward. She walked to where he sat, hands bound, shoulder bandaged, his face ashen with shock and pain, in the beginning understanding that he had finally truly lost. "Victor," she said quietly. He looked at her with hatred undiminished. "This isn't over. Even in prison, I have reach. I have friends. You'll never be safe. Maybe, but I'll also never be yours again. And watching you lose, watching you realize that all your money and power and violence couldn't keep one woman from choosing freedom, that's enough for me." She turned and walked away. Did not look back. Did not need to. Victor Ashford was her past. Whatever came next would be her future, and it would be hers to choose. The sun set on the Thornton Ranch that evening through smoke and exhaustion. The barn was a total loss, burned to its stone foundation. The cabin bore the scars of battle walls pocked with bullet holes, windows shattered, blood on the porch. 2 defenders were dead, 5 more seriously wounded. Cattle scattered across 3 counties, fences destroyed, gardens trampled. But they were alive. They had stood and fought and won, and that counted for something. Emma found Silas sitting on what remained of the porch steps, his rifle across his knees, staring at nothing. She sat beside him without asking permission. "How much did it tarnish?" she asked. "In money, I mean, replacing everything." "Too much, more than I have saved." He was quiet for a moment. "But money can be earned back. Some things can't." "I'm sorry, if I hadn't come here, none of this would have happened. If you hadn't come here, a woman would still be trapped with a man who beat her. My barn would be intact, but my soul would be a little more dead. I'll take the trade." Emma's eyes burned. "What kind of man are you?" "Just a man, nothing special. I saw someone who needed help, and I helped. That's supposed to be normal, but somewhere along the way we forgot how to do it." They sat in silence as the stars emerged. Around them, the sounds of cleanup and recovery. Men tending wounded, others organizing to rebuild. The neighboring ranchers promising timber and labor. The mountain community doing what mountain communities did best, taking care of their own. "Mr. Booth wants me to come to Helena," Emma said, "to testify at Victor's trial. Will you go?" "Yes, he deserves to face justice, real justice." She paused. "Will you come with me?" "If you want me there." "I do. I'm strong enough to face him now, but I'd rather not face him alone." Silas's hand found hers in the darkness, rough and warm and solid. "Then you won't have to." They would go to Helena in the morning, would face Victor Ashford in a proper courtroom with judges and lawyers and the weight of law. Would see him convicted and sentenced and removed from power. That was tomorrow's battle. Tonight they had survived. That was enough. The journey to Helena took 3 days by train, a marvel of modern progress that Emma had never experienced. The iron horse carried them east through mountain passes and river valleys, through country that grew gradually gentler as they descended from the high peaks. Silas sat beside her in the passenger car, his rifle stored, but never far from hand, his presence a solid anchor in the uncertain waters ahead. They did not speak much during the journey. What was there to say? The trial loomed before them like a mountain of its own, steep and treacherous. Emma would have to stand before strangers and recount 3 years of shame and violence. Would have to expose herself, her body, her failures to the judgment of men who had never known what it meant to be trapped with no way out. But she would do it, had to do it, not just for herself, but for the other women Booth had mentioned, the ones who had suffered similar fates. If her testimony could help convict Victor Ashford, could prevent him from harming anyone else, then the exposure was worth bearing. The train rattled over tracks laid by men who had believed in progress and civilization pushing into wild places. Emma stared out the window at the passing landscape and wondered what progress truly meant. Was it the railroad and the telegraph, or was it the slow, painful work of teaching men that they could not own other human beings simply because they had the money and muscle to take them? Helena, when they arrived, was larger than Emma had imagined. A proper city with brick buildings and paved streets with electric lights strung along the main thoroughfares, with the bustle and noise of thousands of people pursuing their separate purposes. After months in the mountain silence, the sheer volume of humanity was overwhelming. Samuel Booth met them at the station, his suit perfectly pressed despite the August heat, his briefcase clutched in one hand. He shook Silas's hand with genuine respect and offered Emma a small bow. "Miss Brooks, thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "When does the trial begin?" Emma asked. "No point in small talk. No point in delaying the inevitable." "Way after tomorrow. Judge Harrison wants time to review all the evidence, make sure everything is proper." Booth gestured toward a waiting carriage. "I've arranged rooms for you at the Grand Hotel, separate but adjoining as is proper. Tomorrow I'd like to go over your testimony, prepare you for what the defense will try." They rode through Helena's streets in the carriage, and Emma noticed the way people stared. A large woman in a travel-stained dress accompanied by a scarred mountain man with cold eyes. They made an unusual pair. Let them stare. She had survived worse than curious glances. The Grand Hotel was indeed grand, at least by Emma's standards. Carpeted floors and wallpapered walls, gas lamps. that lit at the turn of a key beds with actual mattresses instead of straw ticks. Her room had a private bath, a luxury she had not experienced since leaving Victor's house. She stood in that bathroom for a long time staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She was still large, still bore the physical marks of Victor's control. But something in her face had changed. The eyes that looked back at her were not the eyes of a victim anymore. They were harder, steadier, the eyes of someone who had discovered she could survive the unsurvivable. That evening, Booth came to brief them in Emma's room. Silas sat in the corner silent but present while the lawyer spread papers across the small table. The prosecution's strategy is straightforward, Booth began. We establish a pattern of abuse, fraud, and illegal business practices. We have 3 other women willing to testify about Victor's treatment of them. We have business associates who will detail his fraudulent land deals. We have Marshall Porter's testimony about the manufactured warrant. And the defense, Silas asked? They'll try to paint all of you as liars and opportunists. They'll suggest you're inventing stories to extort money from a successful businessman. They'll particularly target Emma, try to make her seem unstable, vindictive, perhaps even delusional. Booth looked at Emma directly. They will not be kind. They will ask about your weight, your employment history, your relationship with Mr. Thornton. They will try to make you angry or make you cry. You must not let them. I understand. Do you? Because I've seen strong people break under cross-examination. The defense attorney Morrison is exceptionally skilled at finding weaknesses and exploiting them. He'll twist your words, question your memory, imply things without saying them outright. Emma met Booth's gaze without flinching. Mr. Booth, I survived 3 years with Victor Ashford. I survived running across Montana with nothing but hope and stolen money. I survived a siege that left men dead. I think I can survive some lawyers' questions. Booth smiled slightly. Yes, I believe you can. They spent the next day in preparation. Booth asked question after question, some gentle, some harsh, training Emma to answer clearly and concisely, teaching her not to volunteer information, not to be defensive, not to let emotion override clarity. It was exhausting, draining, but necessary. And then that evening, Booth brought the other women to meet her. There were 3 of them as promised. Sarah Brennan was perhaps 29 with auburn hair and green eyes and a scar that ran from her left temple down to her jaw, twisting the side of her face into a permanent half-grimace. She had been Victor's housemaid 2 years before Emma had tried to leave, had been punished with a lamp thrown at her face. Catherine Yates was older, 36, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that held a deep, abiding anger. She had been Victor's bookkeeper, had discovered his fraudulent land deals, had been forced to help him embezzle, and then blackmailed into silence. She had escaped only when her sister died and left her enough money to disappear. And Lily Ward was the youngest at 23, barely more than a girl really, with blonde hair and blue eyes and a fragility that suggested she might shatter at any moment. She had been kept locked in Victor's Denver mansion for 6 months, a prisoner in all but name, until her brother had broken down the door and carried her out bodily. They sat in Emma's hotel room, these 4 women who had survived the same monster, and they told their stories. Not the sanitized versions they would tell in court, but the raw truth. The fear and shame and desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, they could stop him from hurting anyone else. I tried to tell the police, Sarah said, touching her scarred face. They looked at my mortuary and asked what I'd done to provoke him, as if I deserved this. I tried to expose his fraud, Catherine added. The newspapers wouldn't publish the story. Said Victor Ashford was too powerful to accuse without ironclad proof. And proof was exactly what he'd forced me to destroy. Lily said nothing, just sat with her hands folded in her lap, tears tracking silently down her face. Emma reached across and took Lily's hand. We're going to stop him, all of us together. He thinks he's untouchable because he's rich and connected, but he's wrong. We're going to show the world exactly what kind of man he is. You really believe that? Lily whispered. I have to, because the alternative is letting him win, and I'm done letting Victor Ashford win. The morning of the trial dawned clear and bright. Emma, dressed in her best clothes, a dark blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her sew during the weeks of preparation. It fit properly, neither too tight nor too loose, and it was hers. She had earned the money for the fabric, had chosen the pattern, had sewn every stitch with her own hands. The courthouse was imposing, all stone and columns, in the weight of law. People crowded the steps drawn by the spectacle of a wealthy man on trial. Emma climbed those steps with Silas beside her and refused to look down. Judge Harrison was an older man with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He surveyed the crowded courtroom with visible distaste, then gabbled for order. The territory of Montana versus Victor Ashford. Charges include fraud, extortion, and assault, false imprisonment, attempted murder, and conspiracy. How does the defendant plead? Victor stood flanked by three expensive lawyers. He looked different than he had on the battlefield. Cleaner, more civilized, his shoulder wound bandaged beneath expensive clothes. But the madness in his eyes was undiminished. Not guilty on all counts, Your Honor. The trial began. Booth was methodical, building his case like a mason laying bricks. First came the business associates, men Victor had defrauded in land deals. They brought documents, ledgers, proof of manipulation and theft. Morrison, the defense attorney, tried to discredit them, but the numbers did not lie. Then came Marshall Porter. He testified about the manufactured warrant, about Victor's attempts at bribery, about the obvious signs of abuse he'd seen on Emma even from a distance. Morrison tried to paint him as a corrupt official protecting criminals. Porter's 20 years of honest service spoke louder than Morrison's insinuations. And then came the women. Sarah went first. She stood before the court and told her story in a voice that did not waver. Described 2 years of escalating violence, of being told she was worthless, of the final night when Victor had thrown a lamp at her face and left her scarred forever. Morrison tried to suggest she had provoked the attack, that perhaps she had been stealing, that her story was fabricated for sympathy. "Look at my face," Sarah said coldly. "This is not fabricated. This is the mark of a man who believes he can do anything to anyone because he has money. And if you think I'm lying, ask yourself why I would invent a story that leaves me marked and unemployable for the rest of my life." The courtroom was silent. Catherine testified next. She brought documents, carefully hidden copies of the fraudulent deals she had been forced to facilitate. She detailed years of financial manipulation of Victor, using his wealth to crush smaller businessmen, of the threats he'd made when she tried to leave. Morrison tried to paint her as the mastermind, suggested she was the one who had orchestrated the fraud and was now blaming her employer. Catherine looked at him with eyes full of contempt. "If I were going to frame someone, I would choose a target without unlimited resources for defense. Victor Ashford has 3 lawyers. I have 1. If I were lying, that would be a very poor strategic choice, don't you think?" Lily could barely speak. She stood at the witness stand and whispered her testimony, breaking down multiple times, her horror and violations so evident that even Morrison seemed reluctant to press her too hard. The judge allowed her to submit most of her testimony in writing, and reading it, understanding what had been done to her, several jury members looked visibly ill. And then it was Emma's turn. She walked to the witness stand on legs that trembled but held, placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, sat in the chair and faced the courtroom, faced Victor, faced the jury of 12 men who would decide whether her suffering mattered. Booth began gently, asked her to describe her employment with Victor, how it had started, how it had evolved. Emma answered clearly, factually, keeping emotion from her voice. She described the gradual isolation, the way Victor had slowly stripped away her freedom, the forced weight gain, the mockery, the control of every aspect of her existence. "He would tell me what to eat, when to sleep, what to wear, who I could speak to, which was no one. He said I was too fat to be seen in public, too ugly, too stupid, that without him I was worthless." Emma's voice remained steady, and I believed him. For 3 years I believed every word. "Why did you stay?" Booth asked. "Because he convinced me I had no choice, that I had nowhere to go and no skills to survive, that running would mean death or worse. Fear is a powerful prison, Mr. Booth. You don't need bars when you've convinced someone the door is impossible to open." "When did you realize you could leave?" "The night he used his riding crop on my back. I was lying on the floor bleeding, listening to him tell me this was my fault, that I'd forced him to discipline me, and something broke inside me. Or maybe something healed. I realized that dying while trying to escape was better than living one more day in that house." Booth walked her through the escape, the journey to Montana, the months at the Thornton Ranch. Then he yielded to Morrison. The defense attorney stood slowly, a predator assessing prey. He was perhaps 50, with silver hair and the kind of face that inspired trust. But his eyes were calculating. Miss Brooks, you testified that Mr. Ashford controlled your eating, yet you weigh by your own admission nearly 300 pounds. How do you explain that paradox? He forced me to eat, said it would keep me safe from other men, make me dependent on him. The weight was another form of control. Or perhaps you simply lack self-discipline. Objection, Booth said sharply. Sustained. Mr. Morrison questions not commentary. Morrison smiled thinly. Miss Brooks, you also testified that you were isolated. No friends, no freedom. Yet you managed to save $200 over 3 years. How? I hid small amounts from the household accounts, pennies at a time. It took 3 years to save enough to escape. So you admit to stealing. I took wages I'd earned, wages he refused to pay me properly. Did you have a contract specifying these wages? No. Then how can you claim you were owed anything? Morrison leaned forward. Isn't it true that Mr. Ashford provided you with room and board, clothing, everything you needed, that you were well cared for? I was imprisoned. Were there bars on the windows? No, but he watched me constantly. His servants reported to him. Leaving meant being dragged back and punished. Did you ever try to leave before the night you claim prompted your escape? Emmy hesitated. No. So for 3 years you stayed voluntarily in this house where you claimed to have been abused. For 3 years you accepted Mr. Ashford's generosity. And then when you decided you wanted to leave, you stole his money and attacked him. Isn't that the truth? No, the truth is I was afraid. Too afraid to leave until fear of staying became greater than fear of running. Morrison's smile was cold. You're currently employed by Silas Thornton, correct? Yes. And you're involved in a romantic relationship with him. Emma's cheeks burned. That's not relevant to Victor's crimes. It's relevant to your credibility. You found a new protector, someone whose ranch was damaged in the violence you brought to his doorstep. Someone who might benefit from Mr. Ashford's conviction and the financial penalties that might follow. How do we know you're not inventing your story to please your new employer? Objection. Booth was on his feet. Counsel is making baseless accusations. Your Honor, I'm questioning the witness's motives. Overruled, but carefully, Mr. Morrison. Morrison turned back to Emma. Answer the question. Are you romantically involved with Silas Thornton? I care about him. He's been kind to me. Kind enough that you'd lie for him. I'm not lying. You're a woman who admits to theft, who fled from legal employment, who brought violence and death to a peaceful community. Why should this jury believe anything you say? Emma felt tears threatening, but forced them back. Because every word I've spoken is true. Because I have nothing to gain from lying and everything to lose. Because I'm not the only woman here telling the same story about the same man. And because deep down you know I'm telling the truth, you just don't want to believe that someone as wealthy and powerful as Victor Ashford could be capable of such cruelty. Morrison opened his mouth to respond, but Emma kept talking. You want to know why I stayed? Why I didn't leave sooner? Because men like you would ask exactly these questions. Would suggest I deserved what happened. Would imply I was too weak or too stupid or too willing. Because the world protects men like Victor Ashford and punishes women like me for daring to survive. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Miss Brooks, did Victor Ashford strike you? Yes, Your Honor, many times. Did he confine you against your will? Yes. Did he force you to gain weight as a means of control? Yes. Did you steal $5,000 from him as alleged? I took $200 that I'd earned and hidden, nothing more. The judge nodded slowly. Mr. Morrison, unless you have questions that actually pertain to the charges, I suggest you conclude your cross-examination. Morrison, recognizing he'd lost the jury's sympathy, sat down. The trial continued for 2 more days. More witnesses, more evidence, more testimony, building an overwhelming case against Victor Ashford. His lawyers fought hard, but they were defending the indefensible. On the 3rd day, closing arguments concluded, and the jury retired to deliberate. Emma sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, Silas beside her, waiting for a verdict that would determine not just Victor's fate, but whether her suffering had been recognized as real. 4 hours later, the jury returned. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of extortion, guilty. On the charges of assault, guilty. On the charges of false imprisonment, guilty. on the charge of attempted murder guilty. Guilty on every count. Judge Harrison accepted the verdict, then fixed Victor with a gaze like iron. Mr. Ashford, you used your wealth and position to harm those weaker than yourself. You manipulated the law for personal gain and brutalized women who had no power to resist. This court sentences you to 25 years hard labor at the territorial prison. Additionally, your assets will be liquidated and distributed as restitution to your victims. You will have 30 days to appeal, though I doubt any court will overturn this verdict given the overwhelming evidence against you. The gavel came down. Final. Absolute. Victor erupted from his seat, screaming obscenities, threatening everyone in reach. It took 3 marshals to subdue him and drag him from the courtroom. As he passed Emma, he locked eyes with her one final time. "I'll get out," he snarled, "and when I do, you're dead." "You'll be an old man by then," Emma said quietly, "and I'll be free. That's all that matters." Outside the courthouse, Emma stood in the bright Helena sunlight and felt something she had not felt in years. Not just relief, not just satisfaction, but a sense of justice, real and tangible, served. Victor Ashford would spend the next quarter century paying for his crimes, would die in prison, most likely broken and forgotten. And she would live, would thrive, would become something more than the sum of her scars. Silas found her on the courthouse steps staring at the sky. "You did it. We did it, all of us together." "What now?" Emma turned to face him, this scarred mountain man who had stood between her and evil without asking for anything in return. "Now we go home, back to the mountains, back to where I learned I was strong." They stayed in Helena one more day to complete the legal formalities. Then they boarded the train west back toward Montana's high country, back toward a ranch that bore the scars of battle but remained standing. The journey home felt different than the journey out. Lighter somehow, as if Emma had left a weight in that Helena courtroom, a burden she'd carried so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to walk without it. They arrived at the Thornton Ranch in late August to find it transformed. The neighboring ranchers had not been idle. The barn was rebuilt larger and sturdier than before. The fences were repaired. The garden that had been trampled was replanted and thriving. Tom, Jack, and Danny stood waiting in the yard. Danny's shoulder was still bandaged, but he grinned at their approach. Jack limped slightly, but his eyes were bright. And Tom just nodded satisfied, as if their return completed something that had been unfinished. "Welcome home, boss, Miss Emma." Home. The word settled over Emma like a blessing. This was home now. These mountains, this ranch, these people. Autumn came to the mountains with a painter's palette of gold and red. The days shortened, the nights grew crisp, and Emma fell into the rhythm of seasons. She cooked as always, but now it was joy rather than duty. She tended her garden, harvesting vegetables and herbs for winter storage. She helped with the ranch books, her skills with numbers proving valuable. And she healed. Not quickly, not dramatically, but steadily. The nightmares that had plagued her since Denver came less frequently. Once a week, then once a month. The hypervigilance that made her jump at sudden sounds gradually eased. The shame that had colored her every thought for 3 years slowly, painfully began to fade. She was still large. The weight that Victor had forced upon her did not vanish simply because he was gone. But Emma found she cared less about the number on a scale and more about what her body could do. She could work all day without exhaustion, could lift heavy pots and haul water and split wood when needed, could ride a horse now, something Tom had taught her, could shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy, hit targets at 200 yards more often than not. Her body was not beautiful by the standards of society's narrow definition, but it was strong, it was capable, it was hers. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma began to see herself, not as Victor had taught her to see herself, but as Silas saw her, not as an object to be controlled, but as a person with value, with worth, with the right to exist in the world without apology. Silas himself remained patient. He did not push, did not pressure, did not demand anything Emma was not ready to give. But his feelings were evident in small ways. The way he made sure she had the warmest place by the fire on cold evenings. The way he fixed things in her room without being asked. The way he brought her books from town, somehow always choosing exactly what she wanted to read. The way he looked at her when he thought she did not notice. Jack noticed. He cornered Emma one afternoon in the kitchen, his weathered face serious. "Boss is in love with you. You know that, right?" Emma's hands stilled in the bread dough. I know. You love him back. I think so, but Jack, I'm not ready. I need time to be just Emma. Not Victor's prisoner, not Silas's project, just me. That's smart. Take your time. Just know that when you are ready, he'll still be here. That man's got the patience of mountains. Jack paused. Lost Rebecca 4 years ago and never looked at another woman. Until you. That means something. It did mean something. Emma knew it, felt it. But she also knew that rushing into another relationship, even with someone as good as Silas, would be a mistake. She needed to stand on her own first. Needed to prove to herself that she could survive alone before choosing to be with someone. October brought the first snows. November turned the world white and still. And as winter settled over the mountains, Emma found herself content in a way she had never experienced. The work was hard, yes. The cold was brutal. But there was satisfaction in it. Purpose, the knowledge that every log she split, every meal she cooked, every task she completed was her choice, her decision, her life. December arrived with bitter cold and heavy snow. The ranch was snowed in for days at a time, the men occupying themselves with indoor tasks and endless games of cards. Emma baked bread and pies and roasts, filling the cabin with warmth and good smells. And on Christmas Eve, after a simple meal shared with Tom, Jack, and Danny, she found herself alone on the porch with Silas. The stars were brilliant overhead, crystalline and cold. The snow reflected their light, turning the world silver and black. Emma wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood at the railing, breathing the frozen air. Silas joined her, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one without speaking. They stood in silence for a time. Then Silas spoke. Rebecca used to love Christmas, would decorate the entire cabin, bake for days, give presents to everyone within 10 miles. Made the darkest time of year bright. He sipped his coffee. First few years after she died, I couldn't stand it. The decorations, the cheer, the pretense of joy seemed false, seemed cruel. What changed? You arrived, brought life back to this place. Reminded me that grief doesn't have to mean giving up on living. He turned to face her. Emma, I need to tell you something. All right, I'm in love with you. He said it simply, without drama, as if stating a fact about the weather. Have been for months, since before the battle maybe. Since you stood on that porch and faced Victor Ashford without flinching. Emma's breath caught. Silas, I'm not ready for this. I told you I need time to figure out who I am without someone else defining me. I know, I'm not asking for anything. Just telling you the truth. Figured you deserve to know where I stand. He paused. When you are ready, if you are ever ready, I want you to know what I'm offering. Not rescue, not protection. Partnership. Building something together. Living this life side by side, equal to equal. And if I'm never ready, if I decide I want to stay alone, then I'll respect that. Won't like it, but I'll respect it. Your life is yours to live. Always has been, always will be. I just wanted you to know that if you choose to share it, I'd be honored. Emma looked at this man who had risked everything for her, who had stood between her and violence, who had given her time and space and patience without asking for anything in return, who saw her not as a project to fix, but as a person of value exactly as she was. I'm not saying no, she said carefully. I'm saying not yet. I need more time. Maybe spring, when everything's new and growing. Can you wait that long? I've waited 4 years since Rebecca died. I can wait another few months. Thank you. Emma stepped closer into the space beside him at the railing. Not touching, but near, sharing warmth in the winter cold. Thank you for seeing me. Wasn't hard. You're pretty visible when you stop trying to hide. They stood together under the stars, and Emma felt something shift inside her. Not love yet, perhaps, but the possibility of love. The beginning of it. The first fragile shoots pushing through winter's frozen ground toward spring. The season turned. January was brutal. February even worse. The ranch was buried in snow, isolated from the world, a small island of warmth and humanity in a frozen wilderness. But they had supplies, had firewood, had each other. They survived. And as the days began to lengthen, as the sun climbed higher in the sky, each noon Emma felt herself changing, growing, becoming something she had not been before. Not just surviving, but living. Finding joy in simple things, the taste of good coffee, the warmth of the stove on cold mornings, the sound of Jack's laughter when Danny told a particularly bad joke, the solid presence of Silas always there, but never overwhelming. March brought the first thaw. Snow melted in rivulets down the mountainside, swelling the streams, turning the ground to mud. And in the garden behind the cabin, tiny green shoots began to push through the earth. Seeds Emma had planted last fall dormant through winter, now waking to new life. She was kneeling in that garden, her hands in the cold soil when Silas found her. He stood at the garden's edge watching her work. When she looked up, he was holding something, a small box worn at the edges. Emma's heart began to pound. She stood slowly wiping dirt from her hands. "It's spring," Silas said. "You said maybe spring." "I did say that." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring set with a small blue stone. Montana sapphire, Emma recognized. The color of mountain snow. This was my grandmother's. Only piece of jewelry Rebecca didn't take to the grave because she said to save it for the next woman I loved. Silas took a breath. "Emma Brooks, I'm not good with words. I'm a soldier and a rancher. I know work and fighting and surviving. But I've learned something since you came here. I've learned that life alone is just surviving. Life with the right person is actually living." He took a step closer, did not kneel, did not perform, just stood solid and honest, offering what he had. "You're the right person. You make this place feel like home again. Make me feel alive again. I want to spend whatever years I have left working beside you, protecting you, loving you. Will you marry me?" Emma looked at the ring, at the man holding it, at the mountains rising behind him into spring sky. She thought about Victor's house, where marriage had meant ownership and control. Thought about the fear that had ruled her life for so long. Thought about the woman she had become in this place, strong and capable and free. "I have conditions," she said. "Oh." Silas blinked. "All right, name them." "I'm not a traditional wife. I work the ranch, make decisions, have a say in everything." "Agreed." "I continue helping other women who need it. That's my purpose now, my calling." "Agreed." "We're equal partners. You don't rescue me, we rescue each other." "Agreed." Silas smiled slightly. "I have one condition, too." "What?" "We stop calling this my ranch. It's ours. Everything shared equal. We build this together or not at all." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "Those are good terms." "So is that a yes?" She held out her hand. Silas slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. And when Emma looked at it, at the blue stone catching the light, she saw not a symbol of ownership, but a promise of partnership. "Yes," she said, "I'll marry you." Silas pulled her close, and they kissed for the first time since the night of the battle. Kissed not from desperation or fear, but from joy, from the choice to be together, from love that had grown slowly, patiently, like a tree, putting down deep roots before reaching for the sky. When they broke apart, both were crying. Warriors could cry too. They planned a spring wedding set for late April, when the mountains would be fully awake. Emma wanted to wait, wanted time to prepare, wanted to do this right. Silas agreed to everything. He had waited years. A few more weeks meant nothing. The winter weeks passed in preparation. Emma sewed her wedding dress with help from Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Pratt. Not white, she insisted. White was for virgins, and she was neither virgin nor ashamed. Blue instead, the color of Montana sky, with simple lines and no unnecessary frills. Danny practiced his guitar until his fingers bled, and his playing actually sounded like music rather than cats fighting. Jack carved new furniture for the main bedroom, the one Emma would now share with Silas. Tom rode to neighboring ranches with invitations, handwritten by Emma in careful script. And letters arrived from Helena. From Sarah, now engaged to a good man from Butte who treated her with respect. From Catherine, who had opened her own bookkeeping firm and was thriving. From Lily, still healing but improving, her letter full of tentative hope. Each letter strengthened Emma's resolve. She was not just marrying Silas. She was claiming her future, proving that survival was possible, that life after trauma could be good, that women who had been broken could put themselves back together stronger than before. April 15th dawned clear and warm. Spring had truly arrived, the mountains green with new growth, the air sweet with pine and melting snow. Whitefish Church stood at the edge of town, a small wooden building with a tall steeple and simple cross. Emma walked to that church on her own 2 feet, refusing the offered carriage. She wanted to feel the ground beneath her, wanted to arrive under her own power. Her blue dress fit perfectly. Her bouquet was wildflowers gathered from the mountain meadows, prairie roses, an Indian paintbrush, and lupine. The church was packed. It seemed the entire territory had come to witness this wedding. Neighboring ranchers and their families, townsfolk from Whitefish. Even Samuel Booth had traveled from Helena, and standing at the altar in a new suit that made him visibly uncomfortable. Silas Thornton waited. Emma walked down the aisle alone. No one gave her away because she belonged to no one but herself. When she reached the altar, Silas's eyes were wet with tears he did not bother to hide. Reverend Bradford, who had served this community for 30 years, smiled at them both. Marriage is partnership. Two people equal choosing to build together. Silas and Emma, you've proven this already. Fought together, survived together. Now you'll thrive together. Please share your vows. Silas went first. His voice was rough with emotion, but steady. Emma, I promise to protect you. Not because you're weak, but because together we're stronger. I promise to respect you, to listen to you, to build with you, to love you until death. Emma's voice did not waver. Silas, I promise to stand beside you, through storms, through battles, through peace. I promise to be honest, to be strong, to be the partner you deserve, to love you until death. They exchanged rings. Silas's a simple gold band Emma had bought with wages saved. Then Reverend Bradford pronounced them husband and wife, and the church erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held at the ranch, the entire community descending on the property with food and music and joy. Tables were set up in the yard. Danny played his guitar with surprising skill. People danced on the packed earth, old and young, celebrating not just a wedding, but a victory. The victory of good over evil, of community over isolation, of love over fear. Emma danced with Silas, with Tom, with Jack, with Danny. Danced with men who had fought beside her, with women who had supported her. And for the first time in her life, she felt beautiful. Not because she had changed her body, but because she had changed her mind. Had learned to see herself through eyes of kindness rather than cruelty. As the sun set and the party showed no signs of ending, Emma found herself standing with the other survivors. Sarah and Catherine and Lily had all come, had traveled to bear witness to what was possible. Thank you, Lily said quietly, for showing us that life after Victor is possible, that we can be happy again. We did it together, Emma replied, all of us, by refusing to be silent, by standing up in court and telling the truth. We stopped him from hurting anyone else. That matters. It does matter, Sarah agreed. And now you've married, built a life, found love. You've shown us the whole path. Emma looked at these women, her sisters in survival, and felt a surge of protective determination. This isn't the end. We keep helping. Any woman who needs it, who's running from what we ran from, she can come here. We'll have a place for her, teach her what we've learned, help her find her strength. A sanctuary, Catherine said. Yes, a sanctuary, where women learn they're worth saving. As darkness fell and the stars emerged, the party gradually wound down. Neighbors departed with promises to return for the barn raising next week. The ranch hands retired to the bunkhouse, and Emma and Silas were finally blessedly alone. They stood on the porch of their cabin, their home, and looked out at the mountains they had fought for. No regrets, Silas asked. Not a single one. Good, because you're stuck with me now, Mrs. Thornton. Emma smiled. Mrs. Thornton, she liked the sound of that. Not because it made her Silas's possession, but because it marked their partnership, their choice to be together. They went inside to the bedroom Jack had furnished to the bed they would share as equals. And that night, for the first time in Emma's life, intimacy was a choice, was gentle, was mutual, was everything it was supposed to be, and nothing it was not. The months passed. Summer brought long days of work and warm nights of contentment. Emma ran the ranch alongside Silas, managing books and supplies while he handled cattle and repairs. They were partners in every sense, each respecting the other's strengths, covering each other's weaknesses. Autumn came again, turning the mountains gold. And as the anniversary of Emma's arrival approached, she realized with quiet joy that she was pregnant. 5 months along, the swell of her belly unmistakable. She told Silas one evening as they sat on the porch, their ritual continuing, even as their lives changed, "I'm carrying your child." He turned to her, eyes wide, then pulled her close. "Are you happy about it?" "Terrified, but yes, happy. This baby will be born free. Will never know what it's like to be afraid in their own home. That's everything." "Then I'm happy too." They sat in comfortable silence, planning for the future. Names for the baby, changes to the cabin, how they would manage ranch work with a newborn, practical concerns of practical people building a life together. And then on a cool October afternoon, a wagon appeared on the horizon. Emma tensed, old fears rising, but Silas touched her hand. "Easy, we're safe." The wagon drew closer. A single woman drove it, young and thin and bruised. Her dress was torn, her face was hollow. Her eyes held the same desperate hope that Emma's had held a year ago. She pulled the wagon to a stop and climbed down with the careful movements of someone in pain. "Is this the Thornton Ranch?" "It is," Emma said. "I heard there's a woman here who helps people like me. A woman named Emma who understands what it's like to run." Emma placed one hand on her swollen belly and smiled. "I'm Emma, and you're safe now." "What's your name?" Ruth Morrison. I'm running from my husband in Butte. He's a mine owner, rich, powerful. He'll come looking for me." "Let him come." Emma gestured toward the cabin. "You're home now. Come inside. We'll feed you, give you a place to rest. And when your husband comes, if he comes, he'll learn what my husband learned. That some things aren't for sale, no matter how much money you have." Ruth's eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do this for me? You don't know me." "Because someone did it for me." Emma looked at Silas, at the mountains, at the sanctuary they had built from ashes and determination. "And because this is what we do here. We stand for those who can't stand alone. We protect those who need protecting. We teach women that they're worth more than they've been told." She led Ruth inside to the same small room she had once occupied. The room where she had learned to sleep without fear, where she had begun the slow process of healing. And watching Ruth sink onto the bed with exhausted gratitude, Emma understood. This was her purpose. This was what all the pain and struggle and survival had been for. Not just to save herself, but to show others the path. To be the proof that escape was possible, that life after abuse could be good, that strength could be found even in the darkest places. That evening, as the sun set over the Montana mountains, Emma stood on the porch with Silas's arm around her shoulders, and Ruth visible through the window, eating her first real meal in God knew how long. Danny was teaching her how to hold a rifle, patient and kind. Tom was checking the perimeter, always vigilant. Jack was telling stories that made Ruth laugh despite everything. The cycle continued. A woman came broken, found sanctuary, learned she was strong, and someday maybe she would offer the same to another. Emma Brooks Thornton, who had arrived at this ranch with nothing but fear and hope, who had stood against evil and won, who had learned to see herself as valuable, looked out at the land she had fought for and felt peace. Not because the world was safe, not because evil had been defeated forever, but because here on this patch of Montana mountain, in this community of stubborn, principled people, good had a stronghold. Justice had a home, and women who had been told they were worthless learned the truth. They were worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth everything. The mountains remembered. The mountains always would. And in that memory, in that testimony of survival and strength and the refusal to be broken, other women would find their path, would learn they could run, could fight, could live. The work was never finished, but it was good work. And Emma Thornton, mother to be, wife, rancher, survivor, was exactly where she belonged. Home at last, free at last, whole at last. The story ended not with a period, but with an ellipsis. Not because it was incomplete, but because it would continue. Ruth's story was just beginning. Other women would come. Other battles would be fought. But they would be fought from a position of strength with the knowledge that victory was possible. Emma had proven it, and that proof was worth more than all of Victor Ashford's money. More than comfort or safety or ease, because it gave hope. And hope, Emma had learned, was the most valuable thing in the world. She carried it now, in her heart, in her home, in the child growing inside her. Hope that the world could be better, that men could be good, that love could heal, that women could be strong. And standing on that porch as the stars emerged, Emma smiled. Not because the past was forgotten, but because the future was hers to write, and she would write it well.